Welcome, everyone. We'll get started here in a minute. Just want people to get logged in. Thanks for joining us. All right, I think more people are joining, but we will get started. Welcome, everyone, to the Kelly Cawthorn webinar series as we continue in the month of June. I am Jacqueline Tim, the Director of Communications and Association Management at Kelly Cawthorn. And today we are super excited to have Sean Egan here with us. He is a lifelong advocate for working people and families in Michigan. Sean currently serves at the Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity, where he leads efforts around workplace safety, labor rights, and mental health. Sean is a Navy veteran, a journeyman electrician, and a longtime union leader with deep roots in West Michigan. Over the years, Sean has earned recognition for his leadership, including the 2023 Samuel Gompers Award, the 2024 George Meany Award, and being named one of Crain's Detroit Business 50 Names to Know in Government. Whether it's improving job safety, supporting mental health at work, or helping more Michiganders get into the middle class, Sean brings heart, experience, and commitment to everything he does. So, welcome, Sean, and I will pass it over to you. Thanks for being with us.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I think this follows on a presentation I was able to do just a few weeks ago with one of your clients, and Melissa McKinley was there, and it, just kind of hit home on kind of what we're talking about, what we're trying to do. So, as Jackie mentioned, my day-to-day job, as I like to joke, is I oversee my OSHA, workers' comp, wage and hour, and the Bureau of Employment Relations. But during the pandemic, the governor also appointed me as COVID Workplace Safety Director. So obviously a trying and difficult time for all of us across our society. And as we were sort of rolling out of the emergency part of COVID in the beginning of 2022, the governor talked about mental health during her State of the State address. And she was really talking about community mental health resources. So that connection to individual behavioral health support, critically important. We certainly always champion that too. But my boss, Director Susan Corbin, and I started talking about, like, we should probably think about workplaces and take a look at what's happening across workplaces, not only in Michigan, but across the country. And I share that, and I'll share why in a second. But so we didn't really know what to do. So we put together work groups. We had big business and small business and labor union folks and a whole bunch of really, really smart people, psychiatrists, psychologists, organizational psychologists, partnership with DHHS in Michigan here, and some of their folks, universities, you name it. And we spent a couple of months just diving through data. So what I'm going to share with you today are some of the results of what we saw there and some of the direction we're trying to go, and then some things that you should be thinking about for yourselves as you're watching. So as I get started, what I always like to share is we often think about this in terms of others, like who we work with, who works for us, who works with us, and all that kind of stuff, maybe our family and our friends. And we're not always thinking about me. Do both. Do both today, because everybody on here is a leader. Everything I'm talking about is happening to you too. So you want to make sure that you're being mindful of where we're going and what's kind of happening out there. But I'll just run through kind of what we found, and then we'll go from there. I assume you can all see my slides. I can see me. So, okay, we're good. I saw Jackie shaking her head. So when we first got rolling, we quickly identified the World Health Organization had kind of come up with a framework for mental health in the workplace, probably around 2006, 2008. And they found these four kind of key points. And now for most of us, when we see a bunch of bubbles together, we think of a Venn diagram. This is not a Venn diagram. It's actually more linear. And what they suggest is that you really have to focus in on that physical work environment first. And I'm going to share with you why, but you think about more hazardous industries, workers are going to start with a higher level of stress than they might in other types of industries. So as shared, I'm an electrician by trade, I'm an attorney by education. Certainly the hazards of the electrical industry much higher than the hazards of being a lawyer. So you're coming in with a higher level of stress, and then you can move into sort of psychosocial, personal health resources, and enterprise community involvement. Psychosocial, just what it sounds like. How supportive is the work environment? How do we work? What kind of resources might we have in the work environment? How do we deal with workplace bullying and harassment? How do we deal with bad customer interactions? you can picture different industries having different needs. Those that interact with customers are at a higher level of stress, and how an employer might react to some of those engagements that we hear about out there is important for that psychosocial work environment. The same is true with excessive overtime or high production standards or certain things that are adding to stress. So those are things that we want to be thinking about. And then, of course, that connection to personal health resources. So this could be like your EAP, your ESP programs, your medical health and mental health benefits, some of the other connections that employers can help make to community mental health resources. And then while it's important, we don't spend a lot of time on the enterprise community involvement, but in study after study, you'll find the more engaged an employer is with their local community, it has a positive net impact on the workers that are in the workplace. So there's a good foundation. So in June of 2022, we launched our report. You'll have a QR code at the end, and I'll tell you how to get to that if you want, and other resources that we have available. And over the past 3 years, we've been implementing the 9 recommendations that came out of that work group, which include creating a resource hub, which we did in January of 2023. That's michigan.gov/workplace mental health. We started an education series, so we do monthly webinar series. If you aren't following those, they've been fantastic. We have experts from across the country helping us out. First 3 months of this year, we focused on techno stress and how technology is impacting us both inside and outside of the workplace, how it's changing how we communicate, and not always for the good, and things that we can do to address that. This past couple of months, we've been focused in on how leaders can integrate and change workplace culture and implant workplace mental health and well-being as a staple of their organization and the impacts that that has. And then doing things as an employer in the state of Michigan as well. We're continuing to build out the other pieces, but our experience over the last 3 years, having talked with thousands of employers and workers across the state of Michigan, both in person and virtually, we've really honed in on what we call these 3 pillars. So as a Department of Labor, we're most focused on what we see in the workplace. And we want to talk with employers about how they operate. What can we do to make things different in the workplace to support people? The example we always used during the work group was healthcare. At the time, during COVID and beyond, we know that nurses are in trouble mentally. And part of that's because they work crazy amounts of overtime. They don't get a lot of paid time off, just the nature of the work and short staffing that's happening out there. They experience trauma because of their work. That's pretty unique, right? So you're creating these opportunities for challenges to develop. And then burnout, we'll spend more time on, is all over the news all the time. And we'll talk about that a little bit later, but that's an occupational phenomenon. So that's a workplace issue that we have to deal with. And then we talk about things affecting the workplace. So that's all of the things that we carry with us. Now, I always say, like, I don't have stress buckets. I can't really separate the work from the home and the past experiences that I've had, any trauma that I've experienced or something like that. But we will not be the experts, but we are connected to great experts that do trauma-informed work. They do focuses in on work-life balance, wellness things, and all these other tools that can really help people that are carrying things with them. And I'll talk a little bit more about why we need to focus there too. And then you can't lose sight of the connection to individual behavioral health support, like the governor talked about, access to community mental health resources. But what we have found in our report and what I'll talk about today is why we have to focus on systems, not just individuals. Because when we talk out there a lot, people might jump to like, there's something wrong with Sean, but we don't really get to root causes. And I'll share with you why that's so critical in just a minute. The most eye-opening part of this whole endeavor for me was how stress works, how your brain responds to stress. Now, we've all been around for a while, and we know that cortisol is bad for your heart. It's a stress hormone. We know that too much adrenaline is not good for your organs and your heart. That's a stress response hormone. And we know that we need to do certain things to manage our stress, but nobody in my entire existence has ever told me how your brain, what happens when that stress response activates in your brain, and what are the outcomes going to be, because they're the same for all of us. Now, we might both see the same thing and have a different response based on experiences that we've had or other issues, but once that stress response activates, this happens in everybody's brain. And it was so eye-opening to me that I try to share it over and over and over so that you can all feel a little bit better too about why you might feel a certain way sometimes. And I'll share a little bit of my own experience on where it pushed me. So in essence, the amygdala, this little thing in the back of your brain about the size of an almond, controls that fight, flight, or freeze response, that stress response. Once it activates, it engages the hippocampus region up toward the middle of our brain, which is where we have memories and emotional responses. And it basically short circuits our logic center. So that cool thing that makes us rational and logical and thoughtful almost shuts off. So we're going to be responding emotionally and not logically to different situations. And this was all designed to keep us safe from a bear in the woods. Once you see that bear in the woods, that amygdala recognizes the real threat to your physical health and safety, activates all of this stress response stuff. So the adrenaline starts rushing through your body to get you pumped up, enlarges some of your organs, gets your heart beating faster, your blood flowing faster, makes you stronger, faster, all that kind of stuff. And it also releases all that cortisol. It's going to start inflaming your body. It's going to start doing all these types of things. And it's supposed to just only be active until you get away from what's causing the stress or the stressor. So once you get away from the bear in the woods, stress response shuts off. Your body can kind of deal with that short duration bump and all of those things going on in your body, and you'll get back to neutral. Now, likely you won't even remember how you got away from the bear in the woods because you're not logically doing it. Your body is just telling you basically what you're going to do. The challenge here is that the amygdala never evolved any further, so it doesn't recognize the difference between a real physical threat like a bear, or picture any animal that scares you, that's out there in front of you, and the big pile of work that you just got, or the stuff going on with your kids, or the whatever else. Once that stress response gets going, it's only intended for short duration. So when it becomes chronic, it becomes a real problem. And our logic center, our prefrontal cortex, doesn't really start re-engaging until the stress response shuts off. The other challenge here is that both the amygdala and your prefrontal cortex are wired to your eyeballs. Electrician talk coming at you. Wired to your eyeballs, and the amygdala gets information first. So you can get into the stress response before you even had time to think about what was in front of you. So when we see this happening, we have some real immediate effects. And if you don't remember anything else, I want you to remember that the stress response is an automatic bodily response to an abnormal experience or event. Now, when we say abnormal, certainly the bear in the woods is abnormal, but sort of day-to-day chronic stress can do these same things to you. And we all know that some stress is good, because I always joke, like, if you tell me I have 2 weeks to do something, when am I going to start? Probably a couple of days before that, when that stress is kind of there, gets you focused, all that kind of stuff. But if that continues, I'm going to have real challenges. But when the stress response activates, you're going to have immediate things like brain fog and confusion, perhaps body aches. You might get angry, lash out. You might do all these fight, flight, or freeze type situations where you're just going to respond from that emotional center or on stored memories. And I always think from a workplace safety perspective, the thought of somebody in a workplace with brain fog and confusion is very scary, right? They could likely injure themselves or others more frequently than somebody that's not going through the stress response. And if this is pervasive, it continues, it becomes chronic, there are real physical health impacts from this. And you can imagine that, right? Adrenaline, cortisol is rushing through your body. Like we already said, cortisol is bad for your heart. The adrenaline's enlarging your organs. Your organs are not intended to be enlarged for any duration of time longer than getting away from that bear in the woods. So you see real things like diabetes, hypertension, arthritis, potentially heart disease. The American Heart Association is in this game as well, because stress is having such a big impact on heart health that it's important. You can see things like addiction to alcohol, gambling, physical activity. You can be addicted to anything that's going to make you feel better. But the most common outcome of chronic stress is anxiety and depression. Now, those last two, about a year and a half ago, Stanford Medicine said they could likely connect depression in our country to genetics in 40 to 50% of the cases, which means 50 to 60% is coming from somewhere else. And with addiction, they said we could probably connect 50 to 60% of addiction to genetics, which means 40 to 50% is coming from somewhere else. So chronic stress, people being chronically stressed, most common outcomes, anxiety and depression, and it's anxiety more than depression, almost 2 to 1, that happens with folks, are really causing some severe challenges out there. And I have experienced this in my own life. So when I was a young man, I was an electrician. I got elected to head my union. I was on the board over here, and I was on a board of something over there. I had 3 kids under the age of 6. Might be speaking somebody's language I was talking to just before we started. Decided I was going to go back and go to college. So I had night classes going on. Just way too much stuff happening for me, right? So I wasn't feeling good, and I went to the doctor, and he said, I can tell you what your problem is. You're doing too much. Now, 25 years ago, that meant absolutely nothing to me. Over these past 3 years, it all makes sense to me. So where that led me is I started drinking too much, and I ended up having to go to therapy, and ended up in a major depressive episode that I had to sort of claw my way back out of because of all of that stress. I'm not genetically predisposed to either of those things, but I kind of got there. Now I haven't been back there since then because I spend all of my time trying to make sure that I stay okay upstairs, because when you're working in high stress situations all the time, you can really put yourself mentally in a very bad place just by not paying attention to what you're doing. So I have, all these weird things I do to kind of keep it together, because I never got rid of the stress and we'll talk about what that resilience means in a little while. But I kept all of those things I was doing, and I found ways to manage differently. But that not recognizing what was happening to me, not understanding why I was feeling terrible, not dealing with all of that stress and pressure in a healthy way, pushed me over the hump into a depressive situation. Very, very difficult to deal with and to get out of. And the pandemic really pushed us all in a very negative way. Now, there is sort of a natural disaster psychology that happens with humans, and it could be regionalized, like we saw with the hurricanes. With the pandemic, it was globalized. And CDC every year asks people if they're having symptoms of anxiety and depression. Now, it's more questions than that, but as you can see in the slide, before the pandemic began, about 11% of households had somebody say that they have symptoms of anxiety and depression. About a year into the pandemic, we're over 40%. Now, this is really lagging information, so we'll have 2024 info, I think, sometime mid-year. But we saw that in both of those high pandemic years keep creeping up, because as a society, we sort of move up and down together, and then slowly we'll start getting back to equilibrium. So in 2023, that top line number there, still about a third of adults are reporting that they have symptoms of anxiety and depression. Chronically stressful, a lot going on, brain fog and confusion. A lot of people with their emotional center driving their decision making or behaviors at this point. So when we look around and we think like, man, it seems pretty wild out here, there's a reason for that, right? Because we know that emotional reactions are not the best place for us to be. You can't see it over my shoulder. I do all this Star Wars stuff, and the Jedi are always teaching us to control our emotions and all that kind of mumbo jumbo. And there's a reason that we don't want to be thinking from that emotional center very frequently. And I share this particular slide because we talk in different industries, and I'll share a little bit about what's going on in different industries, whether it's college students or apprentices or new employees or whatever else, as coming into different types of experiences. That 18 to 24-year-old age group in 2023 had half of respondents saying that they're having symptoms of anxiety and depression. So Logic Center is not working fully. They're in probably a stress response. They're not away from the stressor. They're probably struggling to get away from or deal with that stress. And when I came into the apprenticeship, way back in the 1990s, can you believe that? Your first day was a lot of negative reinforcement stuff. Like if you fail a test, you're going to be in trouble. If you get a bad work report, you're going to be in trouble. If you miss work, you're going to be in trouble. Now, some of those are reasonable, but when half of your population is already on their back foot, negative reinforcement is not going to get them to the positive outcomes. It's going to be piling on. So if we want people to be successful, we're going to have to change the way that we do certain things and communicate that. And you can see that each age group is still higher than that 11% that we saw prior to the pandemic getting rolling. And the reason we talk so much about systems is that third number there, 46%. What you'll find in study after study, Google after Google, you name it, is less than half of folks that could use help are going to go get it. So what we're trying to do is talk about things that may be happening in the workplace or around the workplace that are impacting people's mental health and well-being, bring people the concepts of mental health in a broader way, the concepts of therapy, the concepts of what things are or feel like, and not necessarily know or expect them to go get help. Now we want to encourage it, but on the flip side of that, we also know if we broke down all the stigma and everybody that could use support said, I'm going to go get help, we don't have enough people to do that. So we're kind of in this spot where we have to do it all. We have to kind of start changing over here. We have to start building over here, and we have to put it all together so that we're all better about what mental health means and how we make sure that we stay on the positive side and avoid those issues like I had myself, because we need to do that. And we have a specific focus from OSHA and MIOSHA on construction industry suicide prevention. And I won't spend a lot of time on this, but construction in particular, this is national data, is an outlier from all other industries. All of these industries, until you get down to about number 12, are higher than the national average that die by suicide. It's nationally somewhere between 14 and 15 per 100,000. In these industries, it's much higher. So there's a target from OSHA and MIOSHA for these specific industries. And in Michigan, we're actually higher than that national average. So you saw about 52 per 100,000 workers. In construction in Michigan, we're at 67.8 per 100,000 workers that die by suicide. That total number in 2022 being 175. All of those were men. So there are some specific tools that are developed to focus in on men in particular, but we don't want to lose sight of everybody, because women actually attempt suicide 3 times more than men. It's the method that makes the difference in the outcomes. And I won't get too detailed beyond that, but you also see some highline numbers here, like 175 in construction, 329 in manufacturing. So we are working from Leo broader workplaces to kind of highlight and focus in on this information so that we can keep delivering tools that might help people kind of avoid this ultimate worst outcome from the things that they may be experiencing. And I only share this slide because I think for a lot of us, when we think about things like mental health and suicide, we think of young people, but the bell curve is actually middle aged for suicides per 100,000. So that's 35.8 per 100,000 in that 35 to 44 age group for men, 10.7 for women. You can see that bell curve, and then you get way over to the right with the 75 plus, and the sort of men just goes off the charts. So the experts tell us that is largely sort of isolation and loneliness, chronic health conditions, a number of things that are happening there. Our Michigan Suicide Commission's working on that type of information. But in that working age population, we do have some tools we're trying to develop and deploy there, because we want to get people the help that they need, or any kind of support that might change that outcome. So you can find all of our information at michigan.gov/workplace mental health. Reports there. All of our webinars are recorded and posted there. Other resources are linked there, and I'll share a few of what those are coming up. OSHA's also focused in on workplace stress. They have a great landing page with some tools for workplaces that they can use. The National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, which is the research side of OSHA, it's actually in CDC, but they're the ones that do all the research ahead of OSHA standards or OSHA guidance or anything like that on different impacts in the workplace, have a total worker health program where they focused in on a couple of industries to start, healthcare being one of those, to kind of deal with the stress that people are facing. And it makes absolute business sense. So if you get our report, it's prettier than this. These slides I'm going to share with you, but the math is fantastic for employers that really invest in and start changing workplace culture, workplace well-being, and workplace mental health. But there's a few reasons for that, why we want to focus on the workplace. One is, as adults, that is the thing we're connected to more than just about anything else in our lives. Now, I know we're fathers, mothers, brothers, sisters, cousins, aunts, uncles, all that kind of stuff 24/7, but we're not going to necessarily see all those folks all the time. But for 40 plus hours a week, for most of us, we're connected to work. So my coworker Randall always says, on any given day, he'll be connected to me for 8 hours. Might not see each other all the time. We might not talk to each other nonstop, but we're connected for 8 hours. And on any given day during the week, he might see his wife for one. So really, where's Randall going to be, get the information and tools that he needs? Who's going to be in a better position to kind of see things there? The other is a couple of things are workplaces are already paying for it. So you saw at the outset, and we'll talk a little bit more about it, those chronic health conditions that come from that brain fog and confusion. So we have higher incidence of injury and illness. We know things like excessive overtime lead to more injuries. We know things like night shifts are hard on people. We know things that like the lack of a predictable schedule causes folks to lose sleep and actually impacts their kids. Like that stuff has been researched. You're also paying for that in absenteeism and tardiness and turnover and all these kinds of things. So there's some real math there. And then I go to this one last is that survey after survey shows the majority of employees say that work is the number one stress in their life. Now, perception is reality. So I always kind of joke like that. I don't have those buckets. And if you called me at 8:05 on a work day and I had a really stressful morning kind of getting into work, and you say, what's the number one stress? I might say work. So maybe it's tilted. I don't know, but it doesn't matter, right? Because perception is reality. And that's the place where workers will keep continually say the number one stress of their life is. And then again, on that sort of younger to older worker, that red bar there was a Gallup survey in 2022 where over the last 6 months, my job has extremely or somewhat negatively impacted my mental health. See young people at a higher proportion, but it doesn't fall as fast for the age groups as that previous chart from CDC did on symptoms of anxiety and depression by age. But this just kind of reinforcing that concept that that's where workers are saying their number one stress is. That 65 plus crowd here, though, very positive response to work because we know that work is valuable for people's well-being and mental health. We know that it gives us connection, it gives us purpose, it gives us camaraderie, gives us a lot of great things, but it does have a diminishing return that can be impacted. So employers generally, and you'll find this all over, is there's about a $4 return for every $1 invested in workplace mental health. And they come from what we kind of term these invisible costs. Now, I know some of these will show up on the balance sheet, absenteeism in particular, tardiness, you'll see that stuff. But what we're trying to demonstrate here is where this $4 return is coming from. So you'll see things like, hopefully over time, improved healthcare costs, like going down, improved health outcomes for workers, less absenteeism, tardiness, lower turnover, all those things that cost a lot of money. What Tufts University found is that one person dealing with depressive disorder will miss on average 27 days a year, where somebody not dealing with depressive disorder will miss about 8. So you got that 19 or so additional days. You'll find varying numbers, but they all come out about the same, that it's more, right? It makes sense. Logically, we understand it. It's more lost work days. So that's lost earnings potentially for the working person. It's lost productivity for the employer. I don't know how many of you have been out there in the field, but when you need 3 people to do a job and you only end up with 2, it makes it very, very difficult to do things. So these things have a big impact across the workplace. And that second bullet there under invisible cost, Tufts University spent a ton of time trying to figure out how much presenteeism costs. So I think we've all been guilty of presenteeism. It's when we're coming into work, but we're not fully engaged. We're there, but we're not quite putting out what we could normally put out. And they compared 10 conditions. 9 of those were physical health conditions, the 10th being depression in the workplace, to figure out which one caused the most and cost the most presenteeism losses. And what they found was that depression by far was the biggest loss in production compared to those 9 other chronic health conditions. And the way they valued that was they took how much less productive I would be if I have depression and divided my salary, the loss, sort of like I'm making X, but I'm not earning X, so to speak, and divided that across the rest of the workplace. And in their math, in this study, they found that that was $109 per employee. So not just the one that has the depression, but that's spread across the workplace. Number 2 on that list was chronic lower back pain. So, depending on your industry, but if you're in production, everybody sort of understands, like if Sean has chronic lower back pain, he's good, but he's not going to be as fast as young Sean that didn't have that. But we don't really pay attention to the bigger cost here of somebody being at work and not able to perform. This connects to things like burnout too. So when that chronic stress is happening, your logic center is not engaged. You don't have to be in full-blown depression to feel or do what's called presenteeism, because you're not engaged fully through your logic center. You're really acting emotionally and responding emotionally and with stored memories. So you'll be productive, but not as productive. And you can all say what you want to say, but I can tell you, I have a lot of days, not a lot. I have several days where I come in and, you're up here is just not going to cooperate. So I'm trying my best and I'm trying to plug through. And we see that manifest in a few different ways. And we've all worked with somebody that was doing fine and suddenly they're not. That's probably what's happening. So Tufts University also found, they use this 10,000 employee thing. The gist at the end of the study is that any given workplace, about 10% of the workers are experiencing depression right now. And that's not permanent, right? That can change, because 1 in 5 of us will have a mental health issue, crisis, whatever in any given year. It's not always the same 20%. We're always going to shuffle through that. Like I said about my own experience, I haven't experienced that again, but I was there at that moment. So it can change. And some information in Michigan suggests that we might be a little bit higher than that, but that 10% is a good baseline for us to be thinking about. And finally, about 40% of all job turnover is related to stress. So in our report, we have a much more prettier presentation of this, but the group, big business, small business, labor experts, talked about why the workplace makes so much sense for the different things we're talking about on how we work, coming into work, the trauma that people experience, all of that kind of stuff, and kind of came up with this map-ish of what the employers control, what the employer can influence, and then where employees have common interests. So what you'll see there, it's pretty basic, right? That the employers control a lot of stuff. And now some of you might have collective bargaining relationships, so you could argue like we have to negotiate some of the stuff, which is true, but there's still a lot of employer stuff, medical and healthcare benefits, workplace rules, how you'd respond to poor customer interaction. What do you expect of your suppliers and contractors? What kind of culture are you creating? What is your commitment to your employees? All of those types of things. In that middle one, what you can influence is like, how do we recognize others as human beings? How do we get employee engagement? How do we build a positive, welcoming culture? How do we show empathy towards others? And then where we have common interests, employee empowerment, engagement, workplace safety and health, opportunities for advancement, whether that's, state of Michigan, we don't have a lot of room for promotions, but we have the ability to continually help people grow, which is very good. How do we handle conflicts in a bunch of different situations? And the good news is that on that $4 return, what you see is great outcomes. So 69% of employees who believe their employer cares about their mental health, less likely to search for a new job. So you get that retention piece that employers are so desperately in need of, because when you're dealing with labor shortages, which are basically permanent, the best thing you can do is keep the people you have. So if this helps you do that, you're going to be down the road a little bit on dealing with labor shortages and changes in the work landscape. They're 5 times more likely to advocate for their employer as a place to work, your best recruiters. So you get that recruitment piece. We got retention recruitment going on there. 3 times more likely to be engaged at work. That means lower injuries and illness, less absenteeism and tardiness, higher productivity, better output. They're 71% less likely to report experiencing a lot of burnout. And we're going to talk just a little bit more about burnout in just a minute, but that's huge, because burnout is in essence like, my logic center is not working anymore. I've been stressed so long and I'm to the point where I cannot move forward until I deal with the stress that I'm having. So you see things like that 4-day work week study where employees are having great outcomes. It's because they're removed from the stressor a little bit longer. So we got to get that time off. We got to get those breaks in the action. We need to make sure that we're doing that to keep us fully engaged. And then we get the community benefit of more than a third thriving outside of work. So we talk about all of that, and we talk about resilience, what I use in my own life. Over the last few months, as you can imagine, I shared the rest of my job. We've been dealing with earned sick time implementation. Very, very busy, a lot of outreach education, trying to get things done really fast, trying to get FAQs updated, trying to inform both employers and employees on what this law is, what it means, what you do, all of that kind of stuff. Very, very busy, running around like crazy, highly stressful. About a month and a half in, maybe not even that long, a month in, I was meeting with a coworker on something totally unrelated, and I felt like I was hyper. So even though I'm doing all of this stuff, it occurred to me after that discussion that I'm in the stress response. Now I can't remove the stressor. So I have to focus on the resilience, if that makes sense. Now, if you can remove the stressor, that's going to make the stress response stop. Earned sick time is going to exist. We're going to have those questions, we're going to have those obligations, we're going to do those things. It'll slow down, but it's going to exist. So I have to focus on the stress through resilience. So resilience is recognizing that you're in the stress response or likely to incur, but you're in the stress response and finding ways, healthy ways to manage that. So the things that we learn, like breathing exercises, chair yoga, you name it, those are very, very valuable for you in the moment. But the long game is you have to deal with the stressor, because what the experts told us is that if we learn to be more resilient, but we just leave the stress, what's causing the stress there, the outcome won't be the same. And the example I like to use is poverty. I think we would all agree, if I could see your heads nod, that people that are living in poverty are chronically stressed. So all of that stuff is happening. And what happens with folks that are chronically stressed is they age faster, they die younger, they have more chronic health conditions. So if we go into a community of folks that are living in poverty and we spend a lot of time on resilience, but just go like, okay, thanks, I'll see you later, and leave all those folks living in poverty, the outcome is still the same. It's not going to change the fact that they age faster, die younger, and have more chronic health conditions, because we have to deal with both. We can't always do that, like I just shared with earned sick time, but we have to deal with both at the same time. So we identified sort of 5 things that employers could do to start building that. One was just taking a look at your workplace. If you can do surveys, do surveys. If you can't, talk to people, kind of see what's happening out there. Take a look at how you're working. We've heard some terrible stories about employers who have worked, just crazy amounts of overtime for a long, long time, and the impact that's having on people. Understand that that's happening there and what you need to try to do to manage that. Look at how your workplace policies, practices, and procedures on those workplace bullying and harassment, time off, paid time off, breaks in the action, breaks from work, workplace, all of those things that happen in the workplace that can be adding to that stress. Look at those employee assistance programs, because nationally, only about 4% of workers will ever use their employer-provided employee assistance program. And I think for many, there are some great benefits in there. Either they don't know. One of the issues that's been identified over and over is that they're typically at least perceived to be connected to HR, and folks aren't really comfortable going there, or even though they don't, when they use an employee assistance program. So there's a perception thing. Look at how we develop ways to engage and empower employees, because it definitely is a top-down, bottom-up situation we have to do here. And if you have health and safety committees, joint health and safety committees, whatever they are, add chronic stress in there so that you can start having those discussions. So some of the next steps that we're trying to do here in Leo is make this a more permanent focus. It already sort of is, but integrate that into workplace safety and health. We're not talking standards. We're not talking like law stuff. We're talking about like consultation, training, education, all those kinds of tools. We're developing a program right now, which we call My Leads. I'll touch on just in a minute. Some other consultation tools and surveys coming from there. And then we're working with other states to kind of come up with a more unified concept and approach so that we can do that. Just quickly revisiting those 3 pillars: in the workplace, affecting the workplace, individual behavioral health support. So as Department of Labor, we focus on in the workplace, and WHO identified burnout as an occupational phenomenon. So when we talk with employers across the state of Michigan, we can talk about all of the stuff going on in our communities, but when we get to the concept of burnout, which we're reading so much about, that is largely a workplace issue. Now, they don't classify it as actually a disease, but more an influence on your health status or contact with health services. So health status being all of those chronic conditions we're talking about, the anxiety and depression, the push toward addiction, all of those types of things are what's going to start happening with burnout. So we really have to look at this in the context of, If we just manage burnout, we're going to have the good outcomes on the other stuff too, because we're going to do pretty much all of the same things to do that. What we don't do when we're focused in on that is deal with trauma coming into work. So I didn't cover it, and I probably should have a few slides ago, but one of the things we're trying to do in that middle pillar, things affecting the workplace, is recognize that different experiences for people cause different challenges. So in our report, we used Philadelphia, did a study of women that have experienced 4 or more adverse childhood experiences. Those are just what they sound like. Bad things that happen to you in your childhood. That can be poverty, can be racism, can be gender discrimination too, because the younger they happen, they can actually impact your stress response for a long, long time and perhaps forever by sort of rewiring your brain if they're pervasive in your youth. So women in Philadelphia that had 4 or more of those adverse childhood experiences were 77% more likely to experience job loss and financial insecurity, all of the stats on all the other bad things that happen, domestic violence, you name it, not good, because we never dealt with the trauma. So what I always share with employers is that I can go to any neighborhood and I can teach somebody to be an electrician, but if I don't deal with those other things, they're going to have a very hard time being successful because they haven't processed those other situations. So what happens is that even in Philadelphia, you try to do the job training, all of those great things to help people get to a better platform, but they didn't deal with the trauma. So those outcomes stay the same, just like that resiliency and stressor situation that we shared a little while ago. So what we're building out right now is what we call the My Leads. It's going to create the tools for employers to learn about their workplace, pull in our partners to do the education, everything else, put all that stuff into action, deploy it across the organization, and then find ways to study it. Because getting back to Michigan information is just hugely critical. A lot of the information everywhere is national data, and the only thing we can sort of extrapolate is that we're not really any different. As I showed with you on some of the bad outcomes, the suicide statistics, Michigan's a little bit higher. So we definitely have some data that way, but we don't have enough. And we need to be able to study this in a more robust way. So I've been talking a long, long time. I hope I didn't bore and put everybody to sleep, but that's kind of where we're at and where we're going. And then we're doing some things internally with mental health first aid, and we're doing some what we call mental health intro training right now. There are some tools, and we have links to those on our website that are pretty easy to get to, and they're pretty cost effective to get to. And then when we do build out our My Leads program, our goal is to offer that up to smaller businesses. When I say that, you know, the 500 kind of number and all that kind of stuff. We can go bigger and large, smaller too, but build this like a MyOSHA consultation program outside of MyOSHA, but like that, where it's free, where we can bring in those tools for free because it's just that important. Cool.
Great.
Happy to take any questions if anybody has them, if we have time.
Yeah, we do. If you guys have questions, feel free to put it in the Q&A box and we can answer them. We'll give it a minute or two.
So Jackie and I were talking sooner, and I won't spill the tea on what she was sharing, but certainly a lot going on. And did you feel like this was relevant for some of the things that you're thinking about?
Yeah, absolutely. Super helpful. This was great. Thank you.
So did you know, I spent a lot of time on that, how the brain responds to stress, because I mean it when I was like, I never knew that. I find that very, very powerful, and actually kind of put it in a way that helps people recognize that there's nothing wrong with you. Like, this is exactly what's going to happen to all of us if we're in that stress response for any period of time. I find that incredibly meaningful.
Yeah, agreed. We did get one question in, Sean. How can we help make impactful changes in the workplace if we're not on a leadership team or leadership is unreceptive?
Yeah, I love the question, and it's definitely one that we encounter a lot, is that depending on who you're talking to, some folks will say, well, this has to originate in the C-suite. Some will say it has to, I kind of shared, it's literally both. So I think one thing that you can do if your leadership team isn't really engaged just yet is, to the extent that you can, try to connect to our stuff, and at least within your realm of control, maybe start pulling that in, right? So it's pretty basic stuff for the most part, being more supportive of coworkers, giving people the benefit of the doubt, giving people a little deference, because we're all going to have these situations in our lives that are going to cause these types of situations, and start, recognizing you're not going to be in a position to pull in like, hey, we should join this thing. You can still pull in within your cohort and then maybe working outward the concepts that we're talking about. So if you go michigan.gov/workplace mental health, a lot of stuff up there, a lot of webinars up there. You can sign up for email updates from us and at least keep tabs with what's happening there. And we're going to continue to try to get this message out there too. And you can certainly feel free to share anything that we have, but we definitely want to kind of, we need to pull it all together so that we recognize that it's not a top down or a bottom up, it's an us situation to try to grow it out. But I understand the challenge.
Thank you, very helpful. That's what they said. So, well, if anyone doesn't have any other questions, I'm sure Sean can be reached afterwards with any follow-up, and you can contact us and we can maybe get it to Sean, and we'll figure that out. But I think that's it, Sean. Thank you so much again. We really appreciate this. Very helpful, and we hope you all enjoyed it. Have a good rest of your day, everyone. Thank you.